Hello Year 8. We're going to look through the assessment and the feedback on your test which you did. In your book, please put the heading, Feedback Assessment, and today's date. Right, so some of the terminology, anomaly. Some people definitely didn't know what anomaly means. They've forgotten. And this has got to do with graphs, when you plot graphs. Categorical values. So I'm going to show you that quickly. Here is a line graph, and there's been a line of best fit drawn through the different points. So an anomaly is found on a graph, on a line graph, and it shows the results that do not fit the pattern of the rest of the data. So you can put a heading, line graph anomaly, without sticking to exact points. You're going to draw a graph, plot some different data here, just freehand, and then show the point that does not fit into the rest of the results and label that anomaly. Can you do that now, please? Pause the video. Right, question 10 was asking you which graph do we use for categoric variables. So here are different colors of cars. These categories are all separate. None of them are linked to each other. For example, this one could have been about meters, and it could go 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 meters. It was all one category. But here we have different categories. And so we use bar graphs to draw the graph. Can you just draw an axis? You can draw about 4 graphs and list the different colors, and then a heading, categoric variables, you can put at the top. Bar graph plots separate data. Pause the video, do that please. Right, looking at some directed teaching, you were asked a question about turbines, what kind of energy they use or they store, transfer energy. When the wind blows, the blades of this wind turbine start to rotate, and the generator starts to turn, and it takes the kinetic energy produced from those rotations to make electricity. So can you put a heading, wind turbines, and write this paragraph out, please. Pause the video. Right, some of your questions were on variation. What is environmental variation? Question 2. And there was a question 20 and 21 to do with variation. So we have inherited variation and environmental variation. Inherited is passed down by parents during reproduction. It's transferred in the genes. Whereas environmental variation has to do with what you do in your life and what happens to you in your life. So variation between humans means the differences. Some of them are inherited. You could inherit these things. And some of them are environmental. We might choose to use tattoos. We might hurt ourselves and get a scar. We might choose to put earrings in our ears or dye our hair different color. That is not inherited from our parents. Through time and what happens in our environment, we might end up actually having to wear glasses. That's not that we were born with eyes that couldn't see or were not strong enough. We might just develop the need to wear glasses. We might decide to cut our hair in strange styles or grow long hair. So you're going to put a heading, inherited and environmental variation, and you're going to list 3 types of inherited variation and 3 types of environmental variation. And then write a definition, this definition in your book. Pause the video. Right, question 3 had to do with reproduction. What type of reproduction requires one parent? Well, here you can see one cell. The nucleus divides, then the cytoplasm divides, and then you find 2 identical offspring. So asexual reproduction requires one parent. Can you put that heading and draw this diagram? This is an example of asexual reproduction in bacteria or in an amoeba, which is a protist. And after that there are 2 questions. How many parents are needed for sexual reproduction? If this is asexual reproduction and there's only one parent, in sexual reproduction you need a male and a female. So that's 2 parents are required in sexual reproduction. Are the new offspring similar or identical in asexual reproduction? Well, you've got one parent, the same nucleus divides, and it forms the offspring. They all come from the same one parent. So these offspring are identical to the original parent. You're answering those questions and drawing the diagram, and then you can continue. Question 4, where are sperm produced? Most people got this right. There was just a little bit of confusion between testes, testicles, and testis. So a male has 1 testis where the sperm are produced, 2 testes, which is plural, and the testicles are the testes plus the scrotum, the sac. Those were generally marked correct. What is the average length of the human or the female menstrual cycle? So that is the time from when the egg is released from the body, the lining of the uterus builds up, and then a new egg is released from the ovary. This is when a female is most fertile, called ovulation. And if that egg then is not fertilized as it leaves the ovary, it will then start to shed the lining of the uterus, and after 28 days the egg should come out the body. This whole time period plus minus 28 days. So every 28 days a female will have a menstrual cycle where the egg is released from the body. Please answer these 2 questions in your book. Right, question 6 and question 12 had to do with energy and renewable energy. So other than fossil fuels, name one other non-renewable energy source. So this is non-renewable. Remember, non-renewable energy does not replace itself easily. It takes a long time, millions of years. So natural gas, coal and oil, these are fossil fuels. And the other non-renewable energy is nuclear. So number 6 was nuclear energy. Write a sentence to do with that. Here's just an example of some renewable energy sources. One of your questions is, why is solar energy and wind energy not always reliable? Well, solar energy relies on the sun, and at night obviously there's no sunshine, so that could become a bit of a problem. And wind energy relies on the wind. So a turbine would rely on the wind. There's not always wind, and that could be affected slightly. Right, one of your questions, you was asked, what energy is associated with an object that is high up? So we're looking here at an example of a dam. We've got water up here stored in the dam. When the dam walls open, or the doors, you can think of it as that, the water that is high up is gravitational potential energy, and that was your question. So that water then will create a tremendous force, creating kinetic energy passing over turbines, which will start to rotate and turn from the force of the water, or the kinetic energy of the water, and the turbine will be connected to a generator to produce electricity. Can you answer the two questions and then write down this whole explanation of hydroelectric power, point 1, 2, and 3. You can summarize it, put it in your own words. Pause the video. Right, this next one, what energy stored do wind and wave power use? So here we've got waves coming to the shore and going back. Here we have turbines that are using wind energy. So the store of it, the wind is produced as a result of large movements of air driven by energy from the sun. So the sun causes that movement, and this means that kinetic energy in the wind is a renewable energy source. You might want to maybe draw a turbine and write this paragraph, please. Pause the video. Question 8. As an object increases its thermal energy store, what happens to the particles? So let's look at a flame and a rod. As this energy increases, what happens to the particles? You can obviously see that they start to vibrate and there are more collisions. So even if we had to put water in this pot and we put it on the stove or the cooker, as the heat or the thermal energy increases, the particles inside that pot or pan will start to increase in movement. They will vibrate more and collide. So it starts to move faster. Write a heading thermal energy and write a description of what happens, please, in this paragraph. Pause the video and write your description. So, looking at variation, everybody possesses genes. They found, if you remember, they're found in your nucleus, in the chromosomes, and they carry your hereditary traits. These are factors that will help describe your physical appearance or your genetic makeup. For every trait, for example, eye color, hair color, height, there are 2 genes. Where did they come from? One came from the mother, the maternal chromosome, and one came from the father. Now, it's not just in humans or animals, even plants have genes. So if we look at an example of the pea plant, there could be chromosomes from one parent, could be round or smooth chromosomes, and the other parent could have chromosomes for wrinkled texture. And what happens is, when those 2 genes get together during fertilization, you could end up having an offspring with smooth outer appearance, a smooth pea. We would say that even though there's a wrinkled gene and a smooth gene, we would then have to say that the smooth gene is dominant. That's why we see a smooth pea. If this pea had to, obviously the smooth one had to be fertilized with another smooth one, we could see that gene that was passed on to this first generation, it could be seen in the next offspring, a generation later. So even though these two smooth peas got together, they ended up having offspring with a round surface or smooth surface and a wrinkled surface. And that means that this gene, it was present inside this pea, but it was recessive. It was not visible. Smooth genes dominated the recessive wrinkled gene. So there's just an example. So if you could write in your book, dominant genes, recessive genes. Dominant genes are what are visible, or you can see the appearance. Recessive genes are not visible. Write the heading up top here, please, and then the difference between dominant and recessive genes. Pause the video. So here we have lions, a male and a female. When we start looking at the genes, we could use letters to represent the genes. So if we're talking about brown hair, and brown is dominant, we'll use a capital letter. And if we're looking at some of them are more pale, or let's say blonde, and this is recessive, it's masked by the dominant gene, you cannot see it, then you're going to see a small letter or small caps. So this small b would represent blonde, the capital B would represent brown. So instead of writing the word brown or blonde, we'll just use letters to represent them. You started writing about dominant and recessive genes. You're going to write dominant genes have power and influence over other genes. Recessive genes will be masked by the dominant, which means it overshadows. You cannot always see it, just like in the peas. You're pausing, you're writing these two sentences about dominant and recessive. Right, so what does dominance do? Basically, if someone has a brown eye gene and a blue eye gene, you might have a person that ends up with brown eyes. And the brown eye dominates, the brown eye gene dominates the blue, because the blue is recessive. Blue eyes in life are recessive. Brown eyes are dominant. And remember I said that you have two genes, one from your mom, one from your father, or maternal and paternal. So if someone has two brown eye genes, what color eyes do you think they'll have? If they have blue and blue, two blue-eyed genes, what color eyes will they have? If they have a brown and a blue-eyed gene, what color eyes do you think they'll have? And if they have a blue and a brown-eyed gene, what color eyes will they have? Remembering that brown is dominant over blue. So here, if there's brown and brown, they can only have brown eyes. This person has two blue-eyed genes. Their eyes will be blue because there's no brown to dominate. So this is very unusual. You can see that it's recessive and it's very unusual because brown is normally dominant. There's no brown genes here. You can only have blue eyes. This person has a brown and a blue-eyed gene. And because brown is dominant, what color eyes do you think they'll have? Brown. This person inherited the blue gene from one parent and a brown-eyed gene from another parent. What color eyes do you think they'll have? Yep, they'll have brown. So could you please write this out so that you understand the different types of inherited genes? And notice that I've used capital letter for brown and a small letter for blue, meaning that that small letter is recessive. It can be overshadowed by the dominant gene. You're writing this in your book now, please. This was part of question 26. So dominant genes, they overshadow or they mask the recessive gene. So looking at the genes, we use capital letters or lowercase letters to code genes. So you're given an example here in question 24. A lady with blue eyes married a man with the alleles or the genes for this color. Now if you knew already that B is dominant, that capital B is dominant, and the small b is recessive, this man, if he had a big and a small b, a brown-eyed gene and a blue-eyed gene, his eyes will look brown. For this lady to have blue eyes, she would have to have no brown to overshadow. So she'd have to have 2 blue-eyed genes. So remember we went through this previously. 2 big B's, they're capital for brown, the eyes will look brown. If someone had 2 small b's, they're recessive for blue, and only if they're both recessive, then you'll see the blue eye color. So if we use capital letters or lower cases, a lady with blue eyes marries a man with this genotype. What color does the man have? The man has brown eyes, big B, small b. The capital brown dominant over the recessive blue. So that would be the answer for question 24. You can write this out. Pause the video. So just a reminder, for anybody to have blue eyes, they must have 2 recessive B's. For anyone to have brown eyes, they must just have 1 capital or dominant gene in brown, and then that person would have brown eyes. So the allele for blue eyes is recessive, the allele for brown eyes is dominant. You already know that. This was question 23. A woman has blue eyes. What are her alleles? Remember, if this is recessive, she's got to have 2 blues. And blue is represented by a small b. So she's got 2 blue-eyed genes. Right, can you do that answer in your book, please?